birdcage is one of the most beautiful sights that you can see, a legacy of the 2010 World Cup by FIFA. And we also know that the Africa Cup of Nations in the Ivory Coast was an absolute smash hit, and it left again a rich legacy. And I'm hoping that today, in this session, we're going to explore how much more we can do with sports. Let me just share a few of the mandates that I've been given in terms of this discussion today. We're asking the question, how can we use sports as a job creator on a continent which is the world's youngest population? How can we look at sports in a different way as an investment that can well prepare some of our poorest economies around the continent? And what kind of infrastructure we need to build for us to be able to achieve this? Let me introduce my panelists. I don't know if they need introduction actually, but maybe I should. Let me do so. On my left is Claire Ackerman. Claire is, of course, a distinguished performer. Those who have followed the story of Rwanda over the years will know the sterling work that she did in helping transform a country consumed by hatred into one of the best shining examples of what political leadership can do on the continent. Claire was instrumental, of course, in making Rwanda a place to invest. So perhaps in terms of making sports an investment vehicle, Claire is more suited than anybody else. Welcome, Claire. Thank you. Let me also introduce Will Mbiakop. He's Executive Chairman, Africa Sports and Creative Institute. Will is a former athlete, so he is talking about what he knows, what he has practiced, and he will address some of the most pressing challenges that we see on the African continent instead of socio-economic development. And he's currently, as I said, the chairman of the Africa Sports and Creative Institute, which delivers research and advisory capacity building programs trying to lift the role of sports in our economies. Will, welcome. Claire, let me start with you, and let's connect the two. We are at the Africa Investment Forum. So the immediate question maybe for most people would say, oh, you are talking investments and business opportunities, etc. How come you're talking about sports?
Thank you very much, Godfrey. First of all, I'm very pleased to be here in Rabat, Morocco. Very beautiful city, very beautiful country. And those of you who love to come to Morocco and keep looking for reasons to come to Morocco, there's one next year. We're hosting the Basketball Africa League here in Rabat, Morocco. So please, you have a reason to come back. But speaking of which, Godfrey, first of all, when you say you're a sports junkie, I believe you. And do you know why I believe you?
Why?
Because when we're arriving at the airport in Casablanca, I saw you wearing a jersey. I saw you wearing, except it was a football jersey, not a basketball jersey. But I did see you advertising Visit Rwanda in your Arsenal jersey. So I do believe you when you say that you are a fan. You can also get a Basketball Africa League fan. It also has Visit Rwanda. So
I'm looking for it. I'm looking for it.
Okay, but sports is a big business opportunity. Globally, we know that the sports industry is about $500 billion. So it's billions and billions of dollars that sports contributes to economies all over the world. But the truth is, on the African continent, we only claim a very small percentage of that economics that comes from sports. And so it's time for us to continuously look at sports as an investment opportunity, as an economic priority, because it really is. We've seen some countries that are taking this seriously. Senegal, for example, hosting the Basketball Africa League for the NBA. We have South Africa, we have Egypt, we have Rwanda. Rwanda recently, I think last year, announced that from events, including sports events, it was earning about 15% of its tourism revenue coming from sports and events. And it was about $100 million that they announced. And so the opportunity is really there. It's not just recreation, it's economics. And so what we're doing as NBA is partnering with the whole ecosystem that requires to do their parts, from governments, private sector, media, sports journalists, as well as leagues like ourselves, to really make sports the priority that it should be. But what does it take? I think it takes, first of all, for countries to have the vision that is deliberate in comprehensively building sports as an economic priority. It needs to be spelled out as a vision. It needs to be spelled out as a priority. And then once that's done, the different actors in the different parts of the ecosystem come together to make that a reality. And we've seen for countries that have done that specifically, like Senegal, they're going to be hosting Youth Olympics, for example. They're hosting a number of events. Rwanda, that are hosting, we're seeing them benefiting from the economics of sports, and I think that's really going to increase, and that's really going to be catalyzed by leagues like ourselves coming on the continent and investing to make this a reality.
Yeah, when you look around the continent, Claire, do you see the kind of political will? That's required to create the visions that you are talking about? Or are we still seeing here, when the national budgets are being announced, sports not even mentioned, except through the creation of a ministry where a few $100 million is allocated?
It's changing.
It is changing.
It is changing. Clearly, we see that from the NBA perspective. For a long time, as you said, sports was seen as a recreation, as a physical education, as a, by the way, a good friend of ours, Masai Ujiri, who's from the Toronto Raptors, likes to say, when a minister has failed to do things in all the other ministries, then they're given the sports ministry. But now we're giving the best, we need the best-minded people and the most visionaries to actually run the sports industries, because they really have an opportunity there. Recently, I mean, Rwanda, for example, you know, I come from Rwanda, and I've seen that President Kagame has been very deliberate. He's built an arena of 10,000 people, investing in building the talent of basketball. We've seen President Ruto, for example, very much investing and seeing sports as an economic priority. Only 2 weeks ago, we were in Angola. We met President Lorenzo of Angola, and he clearly said, you know, he wants to work with NBA to bring sports to the level that it should be. Yeah. So we're seeing heads of state buying into the vision. But, you know, what is important is to show that it's working.
Right.
And what we're doing is really showing, you know, examples of where it's working, where the economics and the social transformation is happening through sports. Talent is transforming. Yeah. The more evidence we can showcase, yeah, the more examples we can showcase, the, yeah, more buy-in we'll get from the leaders.
Absolutely. Will, come in. You obviously have had your experience in terms of building up sports. And I wanted, first of all, let's get your take in terms of just developing sports as a business before we tackle the issue of how sports has been treated. Because the question I was going to ask you is, do you feel like when you come into a room, you are treated like a celebrated economist, or do they simply see you as that guy who was very good at what he did?
Thank you very much, Godfrey. I was not an NBA athlete at all. I did work for the NBA. I was leading the business development part of the NBA for almost 10 years, but I didn't play in the NBA. I played basketball at highest level, but not in the NBA. Look, first of all, I'm very glad to be here. This is great. You know, Morocco is very special to me in my heart. Very, very honored to be here, and very happy that sports is taking a growing position within the investment world, and for a good reason. Here is why. I believe, and I always say that, there's never been a better time to invest in sports in Africa. Never been a better time to invest in sports in Africa. Why? Because over the past 20 years, sports industry has shown annual growth rate of 5% over the past 20 years. It's roughly 3 to 4% of the world GDP, and is growing. In Africa, 0.5%, that's the value of sports contribution into Africa GDP. But we look and we witness a major shift in the game. The shift is more and more investment pouring into our industry across the entire value chain. Let me give you some example. $258 million, that's what has been spent for the Stade of Senegal, you know, the football stadium in Senegal. 104 million have been spent for the Kigali Arena. President Tshisekedi of DRC, Congo, has committed to also build the Kinshasa Arena. That's just infrastructure. In terms of talent development, we have major investment from our brothers from Egypt, the Mansour family, putting $100 million in the Right to Dream Academy. That's another example. Let's talk about merchandising. French company Decathlon posting double-digit figures in terms of growth across the continent. They recently opened another store in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we see that more and more investors are understanding the game and understanding that sports is a unit asset class. What do we mean by unit asset class is while sports contribute to the economic growth, creating jobs and value, it's also very impactful from a global influence standpoint with great ambassadors, and it's very impactful from a social and societal standpoint as well. So sports is a huge catalyst when you think about sustainable growth.
So when you are making the description that you are making, I'm getting the sense of you are talking about another world. Are you talking about Africa?
I like that question. All the example I just gave you all in Africa, right?
Right.
I mentioned to you Senegal.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you Rwanda, Congo, South Africa. And I actually made a big mistake. I didn't mention Morocco. Over the past 20 years, Morocco has been consistently investing in youth development. We have the Centre National du Football, which is the football national center where they develop talents in Rabat, not far from here.
Yeah.
We have the AFCON coming up. We have the biggest stadium being built in Ben Sliman, not far again from here, 100,000 seats capacity for $500 million investment across the board. Not too long ago, I was in Tangier. The stadium is just amazing. And what I really like about this thing is, as I mentioned earlier, sports plays a role of catalyst, meaning that those major sporting events are not helping you to grow on the infrastructure side only, but you look at transportation, you look at accommodation, you look at businesses, you look at the entire economy, and we have to talk about tourism. You know, here in Morocco, tourism is 7% of the Morocco GDP, 7%.
Sure.
Last year, they broke a record, 14.5 million people visited Morocco, generating 104 billion dirhams, that's $10 million revenue. And the target is for them to keep on growing. And to do that, you need an innovative solution. Sports tourism is one of them.
So clear. I mean, clearly, okay, things are beginning to happen here. Okay, great. So this is a world now where we talk about sustainability. And the question I really want to ask is, how do we ensure that what we are hearing, the Maracana of Africa being built here, one big project, that doesn't become just one big project, nor another big project there, and then it all fizzles out. How do we make sure that what is happening is structured such that it is something that will be there in the future, i.e. it is sustainable across the continent, not in one country and not in one part of the continent?
I think one clear way of achieving that is having a league like ourselves. So the NBA Continental, the NBA has invested in the Basketball Africa League, which is a Pan-African league. Every year there's a competition. We've done 4 seasons so far. 2025 will be our 5th season. In the whole entire system, as you go into the BAL, there's what we call the road to BAL. So you have about 25 African countries that participate on average in the road to BAL. You narrow down to 12 countries that have their teams participating. We have countries that you'd never have even seen in sports competitions.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the new countries you have this year is Cape Verde, for example, participating in the road to BAL. We've had traditional countries like Senegal, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, that is very well known for rugby and soccer and cricket, has been participating in the Basketball Africa League. Burundi participated last year. And so we're seeing more and more countries. Central African Republic, Libya, those countries have been participating in BAL. And so the way to sustain this is to give the investments a pathway to utilize those investments.
Yeah.
So talent, previously, if you're very good at basketball, very good in football, you're quickly looking to leave the continent to find an opportunity in Europe.
You anticipate my next question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but what we're doing by having the Basketball Africa League here is giving you no reason to leave the continent to get professional world-class sporting opportunities here.
Yeah.
We're seeing salaries improve of players in the Basketball Africa League. We're seeing infrastructure increase. He gave many examples of infrastructure improving on the continent. But the way to sustain that is to have leagues, competitions that stay on the continent, that are viable, and that actually pay talent as they should.
And that's my next question. How do we ensure that what we are building is able to attract the support and the capital that we require. We know that when we talk about remuneration figures for Africa versus the rest of the world, we are nowhere near anywhere. I'm putting that question to you. I'll put it to Will as well.
Well, as I've said, when we see the Basketball Africa League every year improving, we're seeing more and more investments and more opportunities to actually pay talent well. What we're also seeing is that at the team level, there's more investments than we've seen before. An example I'd like to give is Nairobi City Thunders. This is a new team that has just qualified for BAL, to play in the NBA League, that's on the continent, the Basketball Africa League. Kenya had never participated in BAL. They'd never qualified to participate in BAL since all the 4 seasons we've had recently. Nairobi City Thunders has now qualified to be part of BAL. What made them qualify? Investment.
Sure.
So Nairobi City Thunders went out and really took this as an investment opportunity. They went, raised money. They have private investors that are putting money, and that ability to invest made them be able to acquire good players. They got some of the best players on the continent. They hired them. They invested in, accessing facilities in order to get their training on board. And all of this, getting good coaches and getting good managers, all of that has resulted in them being very competitive, and they're qualifying for the BAL. So what it takes is the right investments in getting the players, training, building the capacity of the teams. And when you show that there's a business opportunity, investors will invest, like we've seen in Nairobi City Thunders. We saw that in the Cape Town Tigers, an example also. And we're getting more and more private investments going in the teams. And when they do that, talent is paid well and sustainability is more possible.
Will?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. With regard to infrastructure, I have a different views. I understand everybody's looking at major, big time infrastructure, big time stadium, and so on and so forth. Look, in basketball, I play basketball, as you know, and in basketball, we often say you have to be true to the game. You have to be true to the game means that you need to know your role. In football, it's the same thing. If you play defense, you play defense. We're not asking you to score 30 points, right? With regards to our leadership, it's the same thing. We've witnessed countries in Africa where they will be building 5 or 10 stadium, 50,000 seats on average, whereas the local population is not even 10 million. So what do you do after that? You've been spending hundreds of millions. What do you do after that? So it is important to be true to your game and to understand who you are within African context. So the second thing is maybe you should consider, and we see that with the FIFA World Cup, to share the wealth, meaning that one country can host with others. So we have multiple hosting opportunities. That's what's going to happen here in 2030 with the World Cup, right? But Godfrey, I think when we look at infrastructure, we need to think at infrastructure differently. And we're going to look at it from a business standpoint. Do you know that the money that is made in sports is actually coming from the daily practice and consumption by the household? It's not coming from professional sports. It's coming from Africans daily consuming and practicing sports. That's where the wealth is. What does that mean? It means that we don't need that many 50,000 seats. We rather need smaller venues, smaller sporting infrastructures that's going to address the daily need of those Africans' households. That is where, to me, the key is.
If I could just add something around the use of infrastructure. I think you asked that question before. How do you make sure they're not wasted infrastructure? I think one thing we've seen from basketball arenas is that they actually use, I'll give the example of Beka Arena in Rwanda, about a quarter of the time of their use is in sports. 3/4 of the time, they're actually using the facilities for something else. And one of the reasons that arenas get really full in Rwanda, as an example, is religious events. So you have pastors coming and hiring the event to have their religious events. You have political events, meetings, big gatherings. You have technology hackathons. You have all sorts of users. And so sports facilities can be used beyond sports, and that makes them really lucrative. You have about 200 days in a year when these arenas can be full. In countries, developed countries, they're actually full, 2 years in advance. That's what I hear from sports arenas. So the infrastructure should be looked at comprehensively, not just for sports, but for multi-purpose. And that's how you really make money from them in a sustainable way.
I want your thoughts on Will's suggestion that when we're thinking about the infrastructure for sports, we should not be thinking of, I'm sorry to have to put it this way, but we should not be thinking of the Maracanas of Africa. We should be thinking about more intimate smaller size sports infrastructure.
Godfrey, if I may say what I just said precisely is we need to have a holistic approach. While we have big time stadium, we also need to complement that with
the big picture stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
Need both. You definitely need both, because
Exactly.
for some of the competitions we have, like the BAL, you have to have those world-class infrastructure. But of course, you have different users. You talked about practice, talked about smaller competitions, smaller federations. Yes, you need both. But to be able to have the world-class competitions, you definitely need big infrastructure, but not in isolation of the small ones.
In part, you have started to answer of my discussion, and this was the question around what kind of models we require in order to make sports sustainable and successful. Let's talk a little bit about what that model looks like and let's spread it across all the sports, really. Mm-hmm. Will, I'm starting with you.
Sorry, I didn't hear
the kind of models that we require in order to build successful franchises in terms of sports.
Yeah, look, there's multiple models. I think obviously from a financial standpoint, I think everybody has to play his role. When we look at development banks, they need to help with access to capital, which is the major hindering to the growth of the continent. Cost of capital is another one. But when we go beyond that, I think what we expect from the development banks is for them to help with de-risking. Unfortunately, there's sometimes negative perception when it comes to investment in sports. And we need those development banks to help with de-risking, mitigating the risk, and sometimes insuring it. And you can do it leveraging on your balance sheet, for example. I'm sure the investor would know how to do that. So that's from a financial standpoint, and that's from the public perspective, right?
Right.
Now, from a private sector perspective, I think people need to look at the key segment within the market. And there are so many. Sports tech is one of them. I think sports tech present amazing upside. It was a $8 billion business worldwide in 2018, and it's projected to be $31 billion by 2024. So looking at certain segment of the market and making sure that we leverage them. Obviously, public-private partnerships is a critical one, and I'm sure everybody would agree. Maybe when we look at all of these, I think there's one thing that is very, very critical, and that's I observe, and I think Claire was mentioning that earlier. It is so important that people understand the game. People have the skill set to understand what they're doing. From a governance standpoint, from an investment standpoint, people truly need to study the market and understand what they're doing. Yeah?
Well, in terms of models, I look at maybe three different categories. The first category is infrastructure and facilities. I think especially for the ones that host big competitive events, like arenas, stadiums, etc., I see two pathways for investing in those. The main one is public funding, because these are very huge long-term investments. You're talking about $100 million and more. You're looking at a payback period of 15, 20 years. And so I think the public sector has a key role there. However, I think there's room also for public-private partnerships to do that. Either government partnering with private sector and government helping to leave the private sector that needs to be paid a little bit faster than the 15, 20 years. What we've seen, for example, is the government builds the infrastructure, brings private sector to manage it. And the private sector makes it viable because they're managing it like a business, they're hosting, they're marketing the facility and able to make money. So that's for infrastructure and facilities. And I think development financial institutions can participate through lending to governments.
You mentioned AfDB.
AfDB, FDB is here. I know TDB, for example, has invested in Stadium and many others. IFC has just partnered with Helios, for example, to set a sports investment facility for infrastructure. So we see these kinds of partnerships and being de-risked by long-term financing coming from DFIs and governments. But there's a second part, which is around capacity building. So talent building. We have a program called Future Pros, for example, at the BAL. I think that can be a mixture of philanthropic. We've seen philanthropy like MasterCard Foundation investing in talent. We've seen UN, we've seen World Bank and all those financial institutions, AfDB in capacity building. I think they can participate in building the talent and helping to see more people work in the sports sector. But there's a third part, which is entrepreneurs in sports. And we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs coming in sports. We're seeing investment in digital solutions. At the NBA Africa, we started something called Triple Double Accelerator. where we identified solutions that support the sports sector and creative sector. We announced our first edition beginning of this year, and we got 700 applications from Africans who want to participate in the sports and creative sector. They have solutions in ticketing, they have solutions in live events, they have solutions in AI that can support industries. And for there, I think the best model for financing is really getting venture capital, getting private equity, getting financial institutions to invest in these sports entities.
Going with my thinking, because I wanted to say, yes, in the past, what we've seen traditionally is that governments are the ones that come in and put up this infrastructure, and it's been their responsibility. But we are also in an era where we know we are increasingly saying government's finances are constrained, and they've got many other demands that they need to satisfy, and we need to get private money into sports. Now, how do we get it into the infrastructure side? And you have touched in part on it. I want to talk a little bit more about it, and then I need to talk about what we'll raise around the consumption of sports and how we should look at it differently and connect it to social media, the age that we are in, and how we make that work. But let's talk a little bit about private money in infrastructure development. How do we make that infrastructure attractive to a Dangote to invest in the same way that he thinks about that big refinery in Lagos?
Maybe not Dangote as an example, but we do have a Nigerian investor called Amusan, who's actually one of the investors in NB Africa. He's investing in an arena in Nigeria. And we went to Nigeria beginning of this year. I believe it was around April this year, and we had the groundbreaking for an arena. And so, and he's visited some of the arenas on the continent to see how they function and to see the business case that there is. So I think that's changing, and we're seeing more and more private investment, not just government investments, investing in infrastructure.
Are we able to create these structures that would enable private money to think about sports opportunity in the same way that they think about, I mean, I know we need to eat, but in the same way they begin to think about setting up a plant to make cornflakes or whatever it is?
Actually, no. Godfrey, sports is actually better than those plants. I'm telling you, sports is much better than building just a plant. Sports is much better.
In terms of returns?
In more than returns. So sports is better in multiple ways. As I mentioned earlier, from an event standpoint, sports is an amazing accelerator for development. It helps you develop your infrastructure, yes, but not sporting infrastructure only. It helps you develop roads, helps you develop accommodation, hotels for tourism. It helps you develop health destination, clinics, and so on and so forth. We see our brothers in Côte d'Ivoire, that's what they did during AFCON. $1.2 billion has been spent across the board from San Pedro, Abidjan, Mbiakop for global development. So yes, sports is a unique asset class, as I mentioned earlier. Sports is a unique asset class. It does bring financial benefit. It helps you from a global influence standpoint. I think Rwanda or Morocco have been doing a great job with promoting their destination through sports. And it also helps you from a social impact standpoint. We will all agree that sports is definitely transformative. It's an amazing transformative vehicle for youth. So you see, very few assets will offer so many features.
Okay.
And by the way, sports is projected to grow at least 3 to 4 percentage points above GDP in Africa. So if GDP is growing by 3 to 4%, you're seeing an additional 3% growth. So sports is growing faster than GDP. That makes it attractive for business.
When you say sports, break it down for me.
So sports industry in general. So that includes the economics of sports. So hospitality, sports events, tournaments, the money that you make from sports is actually growing faster than GDP.
Yeah. Talk, Will, if you will, please, about the idea that you introduced at the beginning, where you spoke about the consumption of sports and how the bulk of the money that's consumed in sports is actually not in the direct watching of sports itself. Or is that what you said?
Yeah. So what I was trying to describe earlier is that, yes, the professional sports is huge, it's aspirational, it makes people dream, and it's big money. And we should definitely push for that, especially from an African continent where we have a unique opportunity to create authentic sporting content. Look at Canal Plus. Canal Plus just acquired multi-choice for $2.9 million.
Yeah.
And they have plans to develop studios, African content, and so on and so forth, right? They actually sponsoring, you were talking about Americana earlier. This is a property that they're looking at, right? So we have a unique opportunity to create authentic sporting content. We should push for more of the BL, more of football major events on the continent. What I was saying is that those events, for example, the AFCON, it comes every 2 years.
Yeah.
Those major events are not on a daily basis. So what I'm saying is that when you look at the wealth created in sports, the majority of that wealth is actually not coming from those mega events. It's coming from the daily practice and consumption of sports by the household.
Sure.
What does that mean? It means that me, as a sports fan, I have to buy clothes for me or my kids to go and practice sports, right?
Yeah.
I need to take a membership in the fitness center, for example, to go and practice that, right? I will, if I like to watch games on TV, traditionally I will either take a sub at Canal Plus or other TV providers and OTTs. Well, I hope we're going to talk about OTTs as well.
Yeah.
But I can also go to my favorite bar with my friend to watch the game on giant screen. And that means consumption as well. So what I'm trying to say is that we are a 1.4 billion people market. We are young, 19 years average age, and we're going to be the biggest population in the world in the near future. By 2050, 1 human being out of 4 is African. So we need to focus on the daily consumption of those people.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say.
What about the disruption? You mentioned multi-choice. And of course, we know the challenges that multi-choice has been facing as a result of the disruption that's been caused by the OTTs that you're talking about, but also the different consumption, the different ways in which people are now consuming television. How do we, one, embrace that disruption and use it to grow sports on the continent? And also, what about social media? I'm in television, and we are being disrupted hugely, I can tell you, in terms of our distribution channels and our ability to reach our audiences.
I'll start? Oh, yeah? Okay. Yeah. Look, Godfrey, there's one thing that is very critical to understand on the continent is, number one, the mobile phone consumption and market penetration. Africans do a lot of things with this now. They do a lot of things. They do call, text. They do socialize with it. Sometimes they can pay their bills with it. And most importantly, they get entertained with this. What does that mean is that it means that there's a major shift from a content standpoint that people, right holders, but also broadcasters, media platform that you mentioned, multi-choice earlier, they need to understand that and they need to shift to that. We see example of ESPN, for example, in the US, where we now have ESPN Plus. Very early, they have developed platforms for people to consume sports on their mobile. And that's the youth. The young people of Africa, they like to do that. And that's what we need to understand. So yes, Canal Plus acquiring multi-choice, as you mentioned, it's a major shift on the continent.
Yeah.
But to be honest with you, I think it's just the beginning. We're going to see more and more moves like that. Obviously, New World TV from Togo, as you know, they've made a big splash on the market, acquiring the football right, World Cup football rights, and recently contracted $242 million credit line from the DFI. Yeah. So I think when we look at OTT, because I think that's what you were mentioning, and social media, we need to understand that, at least that's in my opinion, people talk about the fourth revolution being technology. Fourth industrial revolution to me is technology, yes, but it's actually IP, intellectual property. The intellectual property and technology allow a kid from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, or from Yaoundé, Cameroon, to produce content with this and to put it on platforms like YouTube and make money. It allows a kid from a village to produce content, put it online, and expose his talent and potentially be recruited by Chelsea, Arsenal, and so on and so forth. And from an African perspective, this is a major vehicle to actually leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Claire, we need to wrap. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that the evidence is there. How many people own TVs on African continent? You're talking about 40, 50 million households. You're among the few. How many people have mobile phones? You talk about 700 million. MTN alone, 300 million. So the opportunity is really there for Africa. And at the NBA, we understand that, and we are also moving with that direction. We have our own app. It's called the League Pass. You can download the app, subscribe to the app and watch your games on your phone. Your sons do, great. All your sons, please, and daughters. And then we also have seen growth in social media platforms. You talked about YouTube. When we showed our games last year, BAL, we had one of the fastest growth rates, 230% growth rate on YouTube channel that we're watching our game through YouTube. So that's really changing, and we have to move with that. Our new global media deal at NBA included Amazon in recognition of streaming being the future. Mm-hmm.
Definitely wish you the very best, and hoping that
the mic, your mic.
I keep forgetting this one. So in broadcast television, in business, the microphone is always on. Slightly different. I certainly hoping that we can continue to accelerate this growth that you are talking about, and we see sports being seen in a different light and supported by both the public and private sector. Will, you want to have final word?
Final word. Final word for me, I think we should leave the investors with the top 3 investment opportunities in Africa. I think that hopefully would be very useful for them. Number 1, sports tech, $31 billion market. That's the projection by the end of 2024. Sports tech offer amazing upside, including esports and gaming. That's number 1. Number 2, health and wellness. A $5 trillion market worldwide. African likes to look good, they like to feel good, and they're going to be consuming health and wellness. Number 3, sports blue economy. We have large coastline, and we can do so much with the coastline across the continent. So those are the top 3 investment opportunities.
Final word is come and experience sports in action. Basketball Africa League, our games starting here in Morocco in April, 4th to 7th of April. Next games will be after that. We'll have conferences in Rwanda, in Senegal, and then the finals will be in South Africa. So please come and see sports in action through the NBA's Basketball Africa League.
I can tell you I'm going to watch in Johannesburg. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm hoping that in the boardrooms that they have got behind us, where the people have been working feverishly, we will see sports deals being inked as well. Claire, thank you. Will, thank you. Please help me to thank our panelists, our audience. Thank you. And for you, for being here. Thank you. And you online as well. Thank you very much indeed. Good day.